Welcome to Newsday Studios. I'm Joy Brown, and we are here for a debate between 1st District Republican Congressman Nick LaLota and his Democratic challenger, John Avlon. Now, the district spans between a portion of Huntington in the west all the way east through the Twin Forks. Let's go through a couple of ground rules. Here's how it works. The candidates will get 2 minutes to answer a question directed to them, and their opponent will get 1 minute to respond. My role will be as moderator. Now, Newsday's political team is also covering debate, and that will include fact-checking. Congressman LaLota, Mr. Avlon, welcome, and thank you for being here. Now, we did do a coin toss to determine who would go first for opening statements. We are ready for opening statements, and Congressman LaLota, you're up first.
Thanks so much. Service to our country and community is in my DNA. My dad was a cop, both of my grandfathers were cops, my stepdad was a Navy man, and my brother served for 20 years in the Marine Corps on multiple wars in both Iraq and Afghanistan. I, after graduating from St. Anthony's High School, went off to the Naval Academy and served 11 years in the Navy, deploying overseas 3 different times, visiting 20 different countries. And it's with that perspective that I hold my seat in Congress as we contemplate serious challenges that are going on today in our country, challenges at the southern border, challenges with crime here in New York, challenges with the economy and taxes, inflation, and challenges with where we are on the world stage as a country. These are serious issues that require serious contemplation. That's the perspective that I have. Thanks, Newsday, for hosting this, and good luck to my opponent, Mr. Avlon, here today.
You too.
Mr. Avlon.
I'm John Avlon. I'm a native New Yorker, the grandson of immigrants, a husband and a father. I'm not a professional partisan politician. I'm a journalist, a historian writing books about Lincoln and Washington, and I've run small businesses. Most of all, I'm a country over party guy. I'm someone who believes deeply that we need to unite as a nation. I worked for the Republican mayor of New York, despite the fact I'm a common sense Democrat. Worked for him during 9/11, wrote the eulogies for the firefighters and police officers murdered in the destruction of the World Trade Center. And those heroes did not die to see our nation tear itself apart 2 decades later. We need to rebuild the middle. We need to rebuild the middle of our politics and rebuild the middle of our economy. Because when we do that, we can get great things done. We can address the affordability crisis by restoring the state and local tax deduction that Trump and the Republicans took away. We can defend reproductive freedom because every woman knows it's under attack. We can secure the border by passing the bipartisan border security bill that Donald Trump, my opponent, helped kill. We need to work together, using common facts to find common ground. That's why I'm running for Congress.
Well, let's start off with arguably the biggest issue affecting Long Islanders, affordability, especially when it comes to housing. Let's hear from Carlos.
How to make homes more affordable in the area for the upcoming families, for the families with youth.
But how do we make things more affordable for housing for families on Long Island? And we start with you, Mr. Avlon.
Sure. Appreciate that. This is a constant frustration. The middle class has been getting squeezed for decades, and housing's at the heart of it. Newsday's own analysis shows that the price of housing has raised 87% over the last decade, but notably, only 2% more housing has been built. That's the crux of the problem. We need to get back in the business of building again, but we need to do it so that communities are driving the conversation, that we're preserving open spaces and the historic nature of our communities. One way we can do that is by looking at restoring and reviving the aging stock around strip malls, by creating incentives to build residential on top of commercial, creating pop-up communities that are perfect for starter homes and temporary workers, having good transportation and sewer networks, which is particularly an issue here in Suffolk County. We could do something more, too. There's a bill in Congress called the Helpers Act, and we could modify it to basically set aside a portion of housing that's affordable, not just for cops and firefighters, but teachers and nurses. That's a major step in the right direction. It can depolarize this conversation because too often those essential workers are not able to live in or near the communities they serve. That compounds the traffic problem. So we need to look for ways to work together to achieve that kind of win-win. That's a huge opportunity. On top of that, the man asked about young families. Well, that's one reason we need to expand the child tax credit. You know, we did that for 1 year during the pandemic, and we cut childhood poverty in half in our country. And then we let it lapse. The right thing to do is to expand the child tax credit, to offer that lifeline of $6,600 for families with young kids. Add to that $10,000, which is the average amount that a family would see from restoring the state and local tax deduction. That's $1,600 back in your pocket every year. What would you do with that money? That would help families struggling to keep their head above water, give them a little more breathing room. It's the right thing to do. It's a down payment that we need to make to show that American democracy is working for working families again, especially as we rebuild the middle here on Long Island.
Congressman LaLota.
I believe the question was, how do we make housing more affordable on Long Island? So let's talk about SALT, the first-time homebuyer tax credit, and a low-income tax credit. Let's not talk about big government intervention in housing stock here on Long Island. That's the Hochul approach. That's the Hochul control. We want local control. I'm a former village trustee. I believe that those zoning choices, my opponent talks about putting apartments in strip malls, if that's a desire of a village mayor, a town supervisor, or county executive, it's their choice. The Fed shouldn't step into it, neither should the state government. That's not what Long Island needs whatsoever. We need a higher SALT deduction, we need more first-time homebuyer tax credits, and we need a lower income tax credit as well. That's how we can help make homes affordable here on Long Island. We're challenged. We're challenged with the highest tax rates of the entire nation here in New York State, the highest effective sales, property, income taxes. Since one-party rule in Albany in 2018, the price of cost of everything has gone up, especially real estate and taxes and everything associated with it. It's the reason so many people are leaving Long Island for what they view to be greener pastures in the Carolinas and Florida. Need to get right.
Well, since you brought up SALT, let's keep going with it. Now, the cap on how much of our state and local taxes can be deducted on our federal returns is indeed a very sore subject on Long Island. There is a new proposal that would raise the cap from $10,000 to $20,000 for married couples. Do you think that goes far enough? And we start with you on this one, Congressman LaLota.
No, I don't think it goes far enough, but that $20,000 cap is a step in the right direction. And Representatives Diaz-Esposito, Garbarino, and a few others and I negotiated to get that bill towards the House floor on February 14th of this year. After a long 14 months of negotiation to get that to the floor, Speaker Johnson agreed and said, hey, let's have a vote on this. 95% of House Republicans voted to advance that bill. Unfortunately, we had 0 Democrats help us out on that, Joy. It was a partisan day. It was one of the worst days of my experience in the 2 years in Congress when every Democrat blocked a higher limit for the state and local tax deduction. My opponent was on CNN at the time, and he could have spoken out against it. He's going to be here today telling us how bipartisan he is. He had one of the largest platforms in the entire nation, 5 minutes a week on CNN for 6 years. He's going to tell us a lot today about how bipartisan he is. He had an opportunity on that day on CNN to tell us that his party was wrong when they blocked that bill that day on February 14th. It was bad, it was wrong, but I'm not giving up, Joy. I'm going to continue to reach across the aisle. I'm part of the bipartisan SALT caucus. Representative Suozzi wasn't in Congress at the time. I want to have him help some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle do better when it comes back. I'm pleased that Trump is taking a new position on this. I don't like that 27 tax bill that took away our SALT. I don't like that when Democrats had all control of the House, Senate, White House for 2 years in 21 and 22, they did nothing on SALT either. There's a lot of blame to go around, but we need to work together to help the affordability issue. And one of the main ways we do that is through a higher SALT deduction, Joy.
Mr. Avalon.
The blame lies squarely at Trump and the Washington Republicans who took away the state and local tax deduction. They did it out of spite as part of a political stunt. That's the real problem with it. It's an issue of fairness, of course. It's been in place for 100 years. We in New York give more to the federal government than we get back. And I appreciate that Nick's been talking about working on this, but the fact is his own party isn't interested. They've told us. The head of the House Ways and Means Committee has said just the other week that the cap's not getting lifted in any meaningful way. And so the real chance and the opportunity to do this is when those Trump tax cuts are set to expire in 2025, and then we can negotiate from a position of strength to restore the state and local tax deduction that Trump and the Republicans took away. Here's the most consequential fact of this election for your wallet, for your pocketbook. If Trump and the Republicans are elected, that money's gone for good. If the Democrats are elected, we're going to make it a priority to bring it back. That's $10,000 on average back in your pocket each year. And that bill you put forward, it had a poison pill attached, and that's why it didn't get forward. The fact is you failed to get it done. You failed to restore it. Democrats can and will.
Mr. Avalon, thank you. Let's go to another big issue facing Long Islanders. There seem to be a lot of these. The increase in damaging storms. This has become a serious problem in the First District, which has communities on both shores, all shores as a matter of fact. So let's hear from Isaac.
We've been having a lot of flooding and problems on the North Shore. I want to see if you have any, what's your plan for that?
Mr. Avalon, what is your plan?
This is a crucial issue. The day after that flooding that destroyed Mill Pond, I went and toured the damage. The rain was still coming down. There were rock and mudslides in Port Jeff. There are concrete things we can and need to do. First of all, we need to make sure that condos and HOAs are covered by FEMA disaster relief. That's called the Disaster Assistance Fairness Act. We need to make sure we're investing before disasters occur with $1 billion in the BRIC program every year, because it's cheaper to reinforce and make a community more resilient ahead of a disaster by a factor of 6 than doing it after the fact. I propose creating a tax incentive so that people can get tax deductions when they make their properties more resilient, and including small businesses. We need to make sure that the advances we've made on this through the Inflation Reduction Act, which had the greatest investments in combating climate change in our history, aren't clawed back, which my opponents propose to do. We need to make sure we are investing, that we are a leader in combating climate change. I've spoken to the mayor of Head of the Harbor. There's a lot of frustration about the infrastructure issues. This is an issue we need a whole of government approach. What we can't afford is what's known as greenwashing, where politicians talk about the environment, but then want to claw back the provisions that we've already put in place, hard-won provisions. We've lost decades to kind of denialism in the Republican Party, and I appreciate that my opponent is not a climate change denialist. But too many folks have taken that position. We need to invest. We need to focus on climate change mitigation and then innovation. That's the second piece of the equation we don't talk enough about, because we have a huge opportunity here on Long Island to actually create the next generation of clean energy technology between the extraordinary work being done at Brookhaven National Labs and Stony Brook on clean energy technology, and the development of Discovery Park right outside, which is designed to incubate next generation businesses that can transform the economy here on Long Island. So we need to be investing to focus on climate change mitigation, make sure those dollars are getting through, and climate change innovation to take advantage of this crisis to turn it into an opportunity for our region economically. That's how you win. We innovate our way out of the problem, and we protect the people at risk right now.
Thank you. Congressman Lalotta.
Either my opponent is misinformed or he's just not telling the truth, or maybe it's a mix of the both. Newsday reported on this maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago that I was one of 18 House Republicans to sign a letter urging that some of those energy tax credits embedded in the IRA are good and we should keep them. Even if we repeal other elements of that Inflation Reduction Act, which many of them should be repealed, there are things worthy of preservation. Some of them have to do with the energy tax credits. I'm a lifelong Long Islander. I've been here through Hurricane Gloria, Superstorm Sandy. I'm the only one on the stage who can say something even close to that. And these storms hurt us, and they hurt us bad. We have 1,000 miles of coastline here in this district. Correct. The number one answer is a greater federal investment into our infrastructure. We passed a $1.1 trillion infrastructure bill. I wasn't in Congress at the time. I would have voted for it. But Long Island hasn't gotten its fair share. Governor Hochul's been playing some politics about how that money flows, not to Long Island. She's putting in her favorite districts elsewhere throughout New York State. We need our fair share. I'm doing my part. I got $150 million from the feds to invest in our infrastructure, jobs, and things having to do with clean water. I'll continue to do it in the second term.
Thank you, Congressman. Now let's talk about women's reproductive rights. Yuri has a question.
Women's rights. I want to know where they stand on those things, abortion especially.
Congressman Lalotta?
Mr. Avalon's been lying. He's been spending millions of dollars telling the same lie my 2022 opponent has been telling. I'm married to an awesome, strong woman. I'm a proud girl dad of 3 awesome girl dads. I do not support a national abortion ban. Moreover, I support the exceptions, rape, incest, life of the mother. And I do not think that government ought to regulate in the first trimester. This, according to the Supreme Court, is now a state's issue for the states to decide. We live in a very blue state with very liberal abortion laws, and I've been quite clear that belongs now to the voters of New York to decide the trajectory of abortion policy here in New York. But I think we need to talk about women's rights as a whole, because you can't just be talking about abortion and not talk about other things like men and girl sports. This is terrible, and Prop 1, which I am against, but my opponent supports, would do just that, would codify in the New York State Constitution the right of a man to play in a girl's sport, the right of a man to go into a girl's locker room. You can't just talk about abortion if you're going to pretend to be for women's rights. You have to talk about it all. Prop 1 would dangerously allow those things and would destroy the very thing that makes young girls such good, confident, able people later on in life. They learn discipline and teamwork and individualism and everything else in between. These are things that ought to be preserved. Prop 1 is dangerous, and that Mr. Avalon brags about his support about it is totally contrary to Long Island values. This is something you're going to see more likely on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, where Mr. Avalon actually is from. These are not Long Island values. I reject wholly Prop 1, and I'm totally against the national abortion ban.
Mr. Avalon.
Look, my opponent cheered the overturning of Roe v. Wade. That's public. That's on camera. He called it a step in the right direction. which raises the question, what's the next step, Nick? Now, you've said repeatedly and consistently that you oppose second and third trimester abortions. That's a 12-week abortion ban. Let's be very clear about that. You've said repeatedly, and this is from your own website before you scrubbed it, if called to vote on the issue, you would vote on limitations on abortion, second and third trimester abortions. That, again, is a 12-week abortion ban. Look, good people can disagree on this issue, but we don't have a right to make decisions for other people. I believe deeply in reproductive freedom. I believe deeply that the decision should be between a woman, her doctor, and her God, not the government. The nightmare we're seeing of government-mandated pregnancies, of women dying. How many women need to die? This is not an issue that we should be deciding. Women should be deciding it with their doctors, not the government. I think that's a position consistent with freedom, and that's why we've seen such a blowback, particularly in a district where the vast majority of folks believe in being pro-choice.
Thank you, Mr. Avalon. Now, following the Supreme Court's ruling on abortion rights, President Biden floated the idea of expanding the number of justices on the High Court, imposing term limits, and setting up a code of conduct. What's your stance on that, Mr. Avalon?
Highest court in the land shouldn't have the lowest ethical standards. Full stop. Shouldn't be more complicated than that. And and look, I would just say this. It is a tragedy to see confidence in the court decline, directly as it has become more partisan and more polarized. That goes contrary to what the founding fathers intended. The separation of powers is a design immaculately conceived in some respects, but it's predicated upon the idea that the judiciary branch is beyond politics. It's beyond partisanship. But there's been an effort to make the judiciary branch more partisan, more political, and that's reduced people's faith and confidence in its impartiality. The next president will probably pick 2 Supreme Court justices. This crew gave us the overturning of Roe v. Wade after many of them took an oath and swore it was super precedent. So we do think it's appropriate to look at those sorts of reforms. I do not support packing the court because I believe in something like called the politics of the golden rule. And once that starts, it won't stop. So I do think, though, ethical standards are appropriate. The highest court in the land should not have the lowest ethical standards. Hopefully we can agree on that.
Congressman LaLota.
We should have an independent judiciary. We shouldn't politicize our judiciary. When I sat with President Biden at the State of the Union, he did just that. Shamefully, before the entire country blasted the sitting Supreme Court justices who were in front of him, we need to take the politics out of the judiciary. Some folks want to legislate ethics in a different branch of government. That's interesting. Those same folks didn't want to legislate how Hunter Biden made all his money, or President Clinton and his affair with an intern in the White House either. There are things called separation of powers. One branch does not have the right to reach into another and to develop an ethical code of conduct with another. There are separation of powers. It's just how the government works. Yet we should hold our officials to a higher accountable. The mechanism that we have is impeachment. If a justice or anybody else in the executive branch does high crimes and misdemeanors against the country, that's when the Congress can step in and effectuate something meaningful to the country. But let's take the politics out of the Supreme Court. Let's not pack it, but let's not also have politics in the Supreme Court.
Thank you, Congressman. Now, you've probably heard this on the campaign trail. Many Long Islanders are concerned about their federal health care benefits. Let's see what Pat has to say.
I'm a senior. If there is a plan to cut Medicare, what are you going to do about it to stop it?
Congressman LaLota?
I will oppose, as I have, all cuts to Medicare and Social Security. I always think of my awesome wife's mother, who wags her finger at me and says, Nick, don't ever hurt my benefits, don't hurt my Medicare, don't hurt my Social Security. I made a promise to her, I made a promise to all my constituents. We need to keep the promise with the folks who we've made it. We need to ensure those programs are solvent so they can live for generations to come. The wrong idea, and the wrong idea sponsored by most of my Democrat colleagues, is to put more people onto those programs, specifically the migrants. Tim Walz, while governor of Minnesota, wanted to put more and more of the migrants onto college benefits, other health care benefits, and if he and Kamala Harris get to the White House, I fear they would try to federalize those notions that they've articulated in the past. It's wrong. I've spoken out against it. I'm the only one on the stage who's spoken out against it. If we want to keep the promise for Social Security and Medicare, we need to keep that promise with the folks we've made it and not to continue to expand it. There are efficiencies that we can have within Medicare, and the problem is, during the IRA that my opponent supports, the Inflation Reduction Act, it took $280 billion from Medicare, a thing they called cost savings, and they used that $280 billion of your dollars, and they used that $280 billion to put it towards electric vehicle tax credits. So when your neighbor wants to buy a Tesla, He's taken from the Medicare savings that should have been kept in Medicare. I think if we're going to find cost savings in Medicare, we should keep it in Medicare to keep that program more solvent, not to do it into these other wishful programs that have nothing to do with Medicare whatsoever. My opponent, time and again, has said he supports the Inflation Reduction Act, and embedded within is that thing that takes from Medicare and to gives those to EV tax credits. It's totally wrong. It's unfair. It only exacerbates the solvency issue within Medicare, Joy.
Mr. Avalon.
Social Security and Medicare are sacred trusts. They're not entitlements. People pay into Social Security. We need to make sure that Social Security remains solvent. And I appreciate my opponent's words about his commitment to keeping it solvent. The problem is that the Republican Study Committee that he's a member of, a dues-paying member, has actually proposed cutting Social Security by raising the retirement age. That would impact 75% of people who currently receive it. Medicare is incredibly important as well, but savings that comes by reducing costs out of people's pocket, that's a good thing. It's great that we can actually cap prescription drug costs at $2,000 per year. It's great that we've reduced the cost of insulin from $400 a month to $35 a month. Those are steps in the right direction, and the fact it saves the government money, that's what's known as a win-win. That money's not fungible. Let's take better benefits for seniors, and let's make sure we're saving the government money as well. I think that's a step in the right direction.
Thank you, Mr. Avalon. Now, Zahara has a question about an issue that has gotten some attention here on Long Island.
I would like to know what they're going to do for queer rights and trans rights for this year. I feel like recently, regardless of whoever becomes president, things have turned downhill for both of those groups.
Mr. Avalon, we start with you.
Look, I think equal rights is essential. I think about civil rights in the way that I think we need to look at most things. First principles. Let's not get spun around the axle on the latest culture war issue. I think that's a giant waste of time. It's designed to distract. Often those debates are amplified artificially to score political points. I look at things through the prism of liberty, equality, and self-determination. Those are fundamental American values, fundamental American principles. And ensuring that there's equal rights is the right thing to do. Ensuring that people are free to live lives to the best of their ability is the right thing to do. And the demonization of a vulnerable small population as part of a political tactic that's having millions of dollars spent against it, I frankly think it's cruel. I think it's cruel, and I think we need to return more decency to our politics. We need to make sure we're practicing the politics of the golden rule. But I don't think we need to focus on making sure there is equality. And by the way, the Equal Rights Amendment that's putting in New York State's Constitution is about equality predominantly on gender and reproductive freedom. So let's not get misled down that particular rabbit hole. Because usually when the government starts getting involved outside of creating broad standards, there are a lot of unintended consequences. I think the proper role of government is to create a stable, secure structure within which people can live their lives to the best of their ability. So I think we need to make sure we're fulfilling those commitments. But I don't think we need to get wrapped up in every single culture war debate, because they're designed to distract, they're designed to divide, and they're being used that way, and they're demonizing vulnerable communities in the process, and I don't appreciate that.
Congressman Lalotta.
The Equal Protection Clause of the United States Constitution prescribes that everybody within our country, man, woman, black, white, brown, gay, queer, anything else, deserves the equal protection of laws. I believe that with my heart. I have friends who are gay, I have family who are gay. And that's not just rhetoric. I'll tell you the results, Joy. When my party wanted to change some of the rules with respect to gay pride within the military this year via the NDAA, I was one of the people to stand up and say, you're not going to defund that specific aspect. That's mean, that's cruel towards gay folks. When Northport Village had a gay pride celebration, I was there. I think we need to celebrate our fellow humans and ensure they have equal protection regardless of anybody's status.
Let's turn to immigration. That has become one of the most contentious issues on this island and nationwide. Barbara has a question. Do you agree with your candidate's stand on mass deportation of immigrants? Congressman Lalotta, we start with you.
President Biden opened that southern border wide within the first few weeks and months of him taking office. He repealed 64 very effective Trump-era policies that were keeping us safe, that were keeping the illegal flow of migrants into our country, namely remain in Mexico. He stopped building the border wall and fence. He put the border agents away from the border to more and more migrant processing centers. He lowered the asylum standards. It's the cause of so many migrants who are coming into our country. And you don't have to believe me, you can see it with your own eyes. You can see it in the migrant crisis in New York City that's costing U.S. taxpayers, New York State taxpayers, $5 billion for free hotels and health care for migrants. It's the cause of 222 fentanyl deaths throughout America since President Biden has taken office, the #1 cause of death of young folks between the ages of 18 and 45. And now 325 young migrant children are missing within our country, many of whom are victim to child trafficking. It's terrible what has caused. There are a number of solutions. First off, President Biden, with a stroke of a pen, can go back to the very successful Trump-era policies that he repealed by a stroke of a pen. If not, we can use House Republicans' H.R. 2 that we passed in May of 2023 that required the president to do those things that he undid by executive order. Or there are 12 other bills that House Republicans passed that have bipartisan support, including one of mine called the No Bailout for Sanctuary Cities Act, supported by every Republican and even 12 Democrats who said this: no more of your taxpayer money to the migrant crisis for the purpose of free hotels and health care and lawyers for migrants. It's bad. It needs to be fixed. My opponent supports, and despite last night disclosing that he's never even read the bill, my opponent supports a bill that would merely codify the Biden border crisis and would continue to use your taxpayer money for hotels, health care, and lawyers for migrants. It's bad. On deportation, we're going to have to deport some folks. The ones who are committing the crimes, the ones that were here just to take our taxpayer money, those folks, it's going to be cheaper to deport them than support them. On others,
Congressman.
we should find other options.
Mr. Avalon.
I'm the grandson of immigrants. I think immigration is America's greatest renewable resource, but it shouldn't be controversial to say that we need more legal immigration and less illegal immigration. I think we need comprehensive immigration reform. That's what was proposed by President George W. Bush, Barack Obama, and Joe Biden. That's the right thing to do for our economy. It's the right thing to do for the dreamers who are being left in limbo, and it's the right thing to do for the border. But I would have voted for that bipartisan border security bill that Donald Trump and my opponent helped kill. It did add Border Patrol agents. It was endorsed by the Border Patrol Union. It stopped catch and release. It actually adjudicated asylum claims in 4 months instead of 4 years, which is absolutely crazy. It would have added technology to the border to make sure we were stopping the flow of fentanyl, which is killing a generation of kids, and stop human trafficking. The Wall Street Journal said it was the toughest border security bill anyone could get forward. And when Donald Trump told him to, my opponent went online and mocked it. He helped kill it. I think if you're going to fundraise and fearmonger off migrants and refuse to fix it, I think that's a firing offense.
Thank you, Mr. Avalon. Now, on to a situation that's becoming more and more dire: the Israel-Hamas war. Tens of thousands of people have died, and the conflict has been expanding. What's your stance on the war, and what solutions do you support to end the violence? We start with you, Mr. Avalon.
So I lived through 9/11 up close, and that always impacts, it's fundamental to the way I view the world. And so when I saw the horrors of October 7th, my impulse is to always stand with the victims of terrorism and never blame the victims of terrorism. And I was disturbed and disgusted to see so many people doing just that. In my own work and research on extremism as a journalist, I know that it's a particular responsibility for people who are not Jewish to stand up to anti-Semitism and to stand with the State of Israel. We need broad bipartisan support for the State of Israel. Every loss of innocent life is a tragedy. But there's no moral equivalence between our allies in Israel, a democracy, and terrorist organizations. We need to eradicate Hamas and terrorist organizations, and Sinwar was eradicated yesterday. But we also need to make sure we're looking at the bigger picture. The other lesson of being a member of the 9/11 generation is that we don't create a new generation of terrorists. So I think the appropriate thing to do is to make sure we're standing with our allies, that there's broad bipartisan support for the State of Israel always, and I will stand for that. But we're also making sure we're standing up to making sure that Muslims feel safe here at home. They're equal members of our society and community and cannot be painted with a broad brush. We need to make sure internationally the U.S. is playing a leadership role, working towards a two-state solution with a demilitarized Palestinian state, with Hamas having no legitimacy ever again as a terrorist organization. We need to work on rebuilding Gaza better than it was before and making sure that the Abraham Accords are expanded. Those are all steps we need to take. None of it's easy, but none of it will happen from the extremes. But I think Americans' foreign policy needs to remain crystal clear on the fact that we stand up to tyrants and terrorists. We stand with our fellow democracies. That is the stakes of this conflict in the world. As much as it breaks our heart, we need to work back towards a place where democracies are working together and terrorism is not on the menu.
Thank you, Mr. Avalon. Congressman Lilloda.
A lot of platitudes, but it's all about Iran. And we should understand that Israel is America's strongest ally and America is Israel's strongest ally. And that's because we have the same enemies. The same folks who want to wipe Israel off of the map are the same ones who want death to America. They attacked the World Trade Center in '93. They attacked the Cole and killed 17 sailors in 2000. They took down the towers in '01. They did October 7th. It's Iran through its proxies of Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. Anybody who doesn't get that and can't say that clearly doesn't get the problem. Too many of my colleagues in Washington don't have a firm understanding of that. President Obama gave billions of dollars on pallets of cash to Iran when it was struggling, when it had no money. And that revived its war machine that it's now using its proxies to attack Israel through. It gave them that nuclear Iran deal, a terrible deal that allows them to enrich uranium and cause a greater threat in that region. Those who can't say that at a stage like this do not get the Israel issue there. We need to defeat Iran, have higher sanctions on Iran, isolate them
Thank you,
because they're the root of the
Congressman.
problem.
I'm sorry.
Let's move on.
I'm sorry.
Let's move on.
It's
You agreed
incredibly
I'm
important to
sorry.
understand.
What are the rules, Joy?
I'm sorry. You agreed
All right,
to the rules.
I will use my
You can
time
use
elsewhere
your
to answer
time.
that because that's insulting.
You can use your
and
time.
incorrect.
But we're going to stay with foreign
Okay,
affairs for
sure.
a minute. All right?
Great.
Let's move on over. Fighting between Ukraine and Russia has been going on now for 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
with the U.S. and its allies sending money and weapons to Ukraine. Should we continue to do that? Congressman Lilloda, you go first on this.
Reagan knew this. And just like the Iran issue, Reagan knew that weakness invites aggression, that the more you appease terrible world actors, the more they'll try to take advantage of us and our allies. And just like Obama and Biden have done with Iran, Biden is doing with Russia. When Biden got to office, he relieved sanctions on Russia and gave them back the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which allowed Russia to sell its energy to Europe and fund its war machine to ultimately invade Ukraine. Biden also had a terrible Afghanistan withdrawal, which was another green light. Biden also let that spy balloon come across our country. All these signs of weakness internationally that have invited the world's evil, like Putin, to do their evil things. If we're going to get to the root of this issue, we need to understand how to actually confront, through peace, through strength, America's adversaries worldwide. You don't need to be a Navy man who went to the Naval Academy to understand that. You just need to be a parent to tell their kid, hey, listen, you got to stick up to a bully every now and then, because if not, the bully is going to keep on coming after you. And that's what happened in 2014 when Russia took Crimea, and that's what happened recently when Russia took Ukraine. We can't continue to rely on American dollars to bail out other nations who continue to get invaded. We need to have stronger NATO alliance. 16 of the 31 NATO nations aren't doing their fair share, Joy. 16 of the 31 are doing less than their 2% target. The U.S. is doing 3.5% of our GDP. Trump had NATO nations on the better trajectory. He had the NATO nations given more to be stronger, to ensure that other nations were dissuaded from being aggressors in that area. That NATO alliance has weakened. Those nations are doing less financially for their militaries. They need to do more so that American taxpayers don't have to continue to bail out everybody throughout the globe, Joy.
Mr. Avalon.
I think it's important to note that my opponent just said NATO has been weakened. NATO has, in fact, expanded. It is stronger today than it was before because of commitment to enlarging the alliance. And that's essential. I believe that the defining struggle of our time is democracy versus autocracy. I'm old enough to remember when Republicans stood up to Russian aggression. But your presidential nominee, your presidential candidate, preferred candidate, Donald Trump, has said Vladimir Putin could do whatever the hell he wants. And I think it is a sin in the eyes of history that for 6 months, the brave people of Ukraine were left twisting in the wind while Republicans in Congress held up aids, not just for Ukraine, but also for Iran and Taiwan. That is something that we should have separated and acted on in a unified way. And my opponent was silent during those 6 months. We do need peace through strength. Weakness does invite aggression, but Donald Trump is a green light for autocrats around the world. He's tried to undermine NATO consistently. That's the opposite direction we need to go. We need to be strong and bipartisan support for NATO and every other multilateral security alliance that defends democracy.
Thank you, Mr. Avalon. Now let's come home for a few minutes, okay? New York has traditionally been viewed as a blue state, but Long Island has long been considered purple, meaning that it swings between Republican and Democrat. How would you define yourself in a climate where it tends to be more either one or the other?
I don't need
And
to.
we start with Mr. Avalon on this one.
Sure. I am a centrist. I am a centrist. I always have been. My first book 20 years ago was a history of centrist leaders in American politics. This is something I believe deeply in. For a long time, I was a columnist, and I write history books, George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, about how to be a uniter in divided times. I believe strongly that one of the greatest dangers facing our democracy is what Washington warned about, the danger of hyperpartisanship, they called faction. He warned that hyperpartisanship could lead, quote, to occasional riots and insurrection. And now we've seen just that. I believe we need to rebuild the middle of our politics. We need to rebuild the middle of our economy. We need strong leadership from the center. But it's got to be more than just a political dodge. And we see that in campaign seasons. You know, that old two-step where people pretend to be moderate right before an election and then vote MAGA in Washington. We're seeing Ted Cruz do that right now in Texas. It's laughable. The reality is that it requires a belief that what unites us is greater than what divides us. It makes sure that you don't throw in with dividers in our politics. And the problem is that even if you say that you're trying to do the right thing, if your party is empowering extremism, that's bad for the country. We need to turn the page on this toxic tribalism. Our country's a great country in large part because we're the first nation in the history of the world founded on an idea, not a tribal identity. That's why tribal politics are so destructive to our country. That's why the opportunity of this election is to form a broad, bipartisan, patriotic coalition to defend American democracy. We need to reclaim the flag. It belongs to all of us. These are things I believe and have fought for my entire life. We need to strengthen the center. And I believe that folks in the center right and center left have far more in common than they often do with the extremes of their own party. The way to do it is to stand up to illiberalism wherever you see it, to make sure you're willing to work across the aisle to solve any problem with anybody. And it's not to endorse someone who tried to overturn an election on the back of a lie that led to an attack on the Capitol. If a Democrat did it, I'd be the first to denounce him. My opponent endorsed him.
Thank you, Mr. Avalon. Congressman LaLota.
There's nothing in Mr. Avalon's record in the last 6 years to suggest he's a moderate whatsoever. In the last 6 years on CNN, he's been part of the most vitriolic dialogue that is dividing our nation. If you want to do it, just do a YouTube search of Avalon CNN and find out whatever you come up with. He has called Republicans insane. He's called Trump supporters delusional. The only thing he ever says on that network is anti-Republican. Never gives credit on that network for anything a Republican has ever done. Conversely, and I don't want to just go rhetoric, I want to go results, I am ranked more bipartisan than 85% of Congress. I'm part of the Problem Solvers Caucus. When George Santos was doing his lying here on Long Island, I spearheaded the charge to throw that knucklehead out. I stood up against my own party to ensure that mifepristone was able to be accessed by women who wanted that abortion drug. I'm bipartisan not just because it's convenient to say so during an election year on a stage like this. I'm bipartisan because I got the results to prove it, because I always put Long Island and my country before anything else, Joy.
Thank you, Mr. LaLota. Now, many Long Islanders that we went out and talked to in your district, they're not happy about the political rhetoric. Let's listen to what Stacy has to say.
What are we going to do to lower the temperature in the world of politics? Because it's unacceptable. Grown adults acting more for themselves rather than for the people and the children that we're raising.
Congressman LaLota, we start with you.
Great point. I think about my wife when I think about this, who she wants us to be an example to our children, an example to the community. It's important. And one of the first things I did is I told my staff when I got into office, when you book me on TV networks, give me an equal amount of Fox News as I do CNN. And I've done an equal amount of interviews on both because I want to be able to clearly, plainly, straightforwardly articulate what I'm doing in Congress for Long Island, for our great country. I do think that temperatures should come down. Unfortunately, we have some tides working against us. We have extremes on both parties who continue to be a larger part of the dialogue. The advent of social media in particular puts the incentives in the wrong places. It makes people chase after retweets and shares and likes and $5 donations. It's hard to put that genie back in the bottle, but you can look at all my social media rhetoric, you can look at what I've said in networks and everywhere in between that stands for good, common sense, conservative approach. Let's argue on the ideas, not upon personalities. I've built coalitions across the aisle to ensure that I represent that ideology in Washington. I'm part of not only the bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus, I'm supported by No Labels as well. I'm part of the bipartisan Military for Country Caucus. These are groups of individuals in Washington who truly want to put country before themselves, not just with rhetoric, but with results. And that's why I'll say again, Joy, I'm ranked more bipartisan than 85% of Congress. I've passed more bills than 95% of Congress, each one with Democrat support. That's results. You'll hear a lot of rhetoric on the stump. You'll see a lot of stuff on TV. Voters will get a lot of stuff in the mailbox. I suggest that everybody look to actual results, especially in the last 6 years. My opponent, he's going to have the mic in a second. He's going to go down this line about how he's all this squishy centrist. Nothing in his record in the last 6 years, on CNN especially, suggests that he is doing anything to bring the rhetoric down. Everything is vitriolic. Everything is bombastic. Everything is anti-Republican. It's unacceptable. We got to find a way to work in the middle, Joy.
Thank you, Congressman. Mr. Avalon.
We do need to find a way to work in the middle. That's why I'm committed to rebuilding the middle of our politics. But this is a deep commitment for me, and I don't dislike Republicans. My wife's a Republican. I think we need to model that behavior by showing we can disagree agreeably. I helped co-found No Labels. I believe deeply that we need to elevate heroes on the center right and center left to show that there's more that unites us than divides us. And, as someone who's genuinely moderate, you could have backed Nikki Haley or Chris Christie in the primaries, but instead you've bragged when you went out to greet Donald Trump skipping out on a vote to keep the government open. You bragged you were the first Purple District representative to endorse Donald J. Trump. I think we do need to reason together. We do need to set an example. It's not just rhetoric, it's reality. The fact is you're actually the least bipartisan member of the Long Island delegation, according to the same standard you always cite, the Lugar Center. But it is about modeling behavior. We need to cut clear contrast, but also focus on uniting, not dividing, solving problems. We need to focus on how we can reason together to solve problems together. That's
Thank
the
you,
opportunity.
Mr. Avalon. Now let's talk about the future occupant of the White House, no matter who that is. And the question was, no matter who wins the presidential election, would you accept the results? We start with you, Mr. Avalon.
Absolutely. Of course. No one gets a medal for saying they support the peaceful transfer of power. That's been a given since George Washington until the last election. What we saw on January 6th is sickening, and that is about putting country over party. Again, if a Democratic president did that, I'd be the first to denounce them. Never would endorse them for re-election, not ever. And my opponent, he was running the Board of Elections at the time, but I was surprised when he ran last time. He said he wouldn't have voted for the January 6th Commission. That's just fact-finding. That's about a commitment to find out what really happened so it doesn't happen again. And in the past, we've been able to unite after man-made or natural disasters. And the fact we haven't is what's so disturbing. There is a danger. Donald Trump is still saying he won the election that he lost. So is his running mate. And so I think it's an open question for someone who's endorsed the man, whether or not you think Donald Trump is lying when he says he won the last election. Because you're endorsing someone who's promising to pardon people who attacked our Capitol. That's the opposite of law and order. That's the opposite of putting country over party. And that is the direction we need to move in. I also noticed my opponent talked about the social media footprint, he states. And I noticed during the presidential debate between Vice President Harris and ex-President Trump, my opponent tweeted out a meme that called her a Marxist and said she was for abortion on demand and stealing your guns. That's the kind of behavior that feeds the far right in our divisiveness. That's not taking the leadership role of Congress seriously if the goal is truly to unite, not divide. And the good thing about our swing district, our purple district, who you've written about very eloquently, is it requires the politics of addition, not division. Not only to win elections, but to govern and to really represent the people of Long Island.
Thank you, Mr. Avalon. Congressman LaLota.
I think the question was on certifying the election. When I was elections commissioner here in Suffolk County in 2020, I did indeed certify the election here. That's my results. In 2024, prospectively, I've already signed a unity pledge to ensure that my voters know that I will indeed endorse and certify this election too. Not only that, I'll attend the inauguration of whoever wins, and I'll say positive things about our election too, because I think federal courts are the venues to adjudicate election law matters and election fraud claims. That's important. But it's also important, and Google this, guys, on CNN 6 or 8 months ago, Mr. Avalon said the 14th Amendment, Article 3, compels him not to count anybody who votes for Donald Trump. A notion that the Supreme Court rejected 9-0. That the 14th Amendment, Article 3 says, in his words, Trump is an insurrectionist and insurrectionists can't run for president, and thus your vote for Trump can't count under the Avalon logic. A logic that was wholly rejected by the entire Supreme Court, regardless of whether they were nominated by a conservative president or a liberal president. I think that's wrong. You deserve to have your vote counted.
Thank you, Congressman. Now, New York state law requires a candidate only to live in the state, not in the district that they want to represent. You've accused each other of not living in the 1st Congressional District. Mr. Avalon specifically, you've been accused of not living on Long Island. And Congressman LaLota, you've been criticized for living outside of district lines. How do you respond to critics who think you should live in the district that you represent? We'll start with you, Mr. Lalota.
Only one of us on the stage has been truthful about where he lives, and it's been me. I've told voters, and it's been all my material, on my Twitter handle tells folks I'm from Amityville, New York. I don't hide that fact. I have tremendous roots in this district. My awesome wife teaches in Northport. My oldest child goes to St. Anthony's High School, where I attended in the district. My parents live in the district. Tons of relatives, folks I went to high school live in the district. For a year earlier, I was the chief of staff in the county legislature and proud to serve the entire district. For 7 years before that, I was the county elections commissioner serving the entire district. I am intimately acclimated to this district, proud to serve it, proud to deliver for it. $150 million that I got for this awesome district. Traveled around, had 700 meetings in the district, 600 meetings in Washington with residents of the district. I'm working it day and night, delivering for folks of Long Island. It's so important. Conversely, my opponent in his tax forms in New York City, and by the way, he's got a $4 million mansion in Manhattan, a $2 million Sag Harbor summer pad. He's to make us believe, and he said 6 or 8 different times, no, Sag Harbor is his home. Yet, he tells the New York City Tax Department that his Manhattan home is his primary residence, and he gets tens of thousands of dollars in tax breaks for that. But moreover, he says in Long Island, he confuses Northport with Northampton and doesn't know where he's going when he's driving around. He needs that GPS every day of the week. These are 2 different issues here, and I hope that now my opponent will finally be truthful with where he lives so that we can make a proper assessment of what his actual attraction is to the district. He could have run in New York 12 in Jerry Nadler's district. That's where he actually lives. And if he wanted to bring this, hey, let's make Congress more centrist and moderate, well, there's no better target than Jerry Nadler on that, who's way to the far left. He could have run near his $4 million mansion, not his $2 million Sag Home summer pad. But yet here we have him here on Long Island, well, at least for the next couple of weeks, Joy.
Thank you, Congressman. Mr. Avalon.
Only one of us on this stage can actually vote in this election. It's kind of stunning that he's the only member of Congress I know of represented by another member of Congress. And when he ran for Congress, he said that if he had the honor of being elected, he would move. He put his house on the market, and then weeks after taking the oath, it was pulled. He said last election, he said, I think voters of the district have a fair expectation that a member of Congress actually live in the district. I agree. It's just another broken promise. It's a broken promise like the town halls. The man has not held a single open in-person town hall as a member of Congress. To me, that's just a question of doing your job, taking questions. My home is in Sag Harbor, and I love it. And this distraction, this Oppo stuff, has been so silly and baseless, pushed through partisan outlets, designed to distract from the basic fact that he does not even live in the district in which he serves. He broke that promise.
Thank you, Mr. Avalon. Brona has an interesting question. Let's take a look. Do you believe a congressman should gather concerns from constituents or follow one's own instincts? Mr. Avalon, we start with you.
It's a great question. It's a great question. And, you know, it's interesting that when the Constitution was written, it doesn't mention political parties. The intention was to have people balance concern for their conscience with those of their constituents, not partisan concerns. And obviously, Profiles in Courage is about this very question. I think it's about a balance. I think there is an obligation to represent the sentiments of your community. That's one of the reasons we're having a crisis of confidence in our democracy, is that increasingly we see ideological agendas getting pushed that don't bear any resemblance to what the vast majority of Americans feel. That destabilizes faith that a democracy is working the way it should, that the majority rule is. I think it's important to take a real measure of your conscience. If you're willing to be one of those Profile in Courages, and they're not enough, then God bless you. The problem is that the system of gerrymandering we have, there are not enough swing districts like this one. Most decisions are decided in closed partisan primaries. And you hear too many members of Congress in private say things like, gosh, I wish I could vote the way I know is in the national interest, but I can't because I'm afraid of losing a closed partisan primary. It creates cowardice and out of careerism. It makes people do and back things they might not otherwise back if they were really listening to their conscience. So the answer is, like many things, it's a wise balance. You should represent the views of your community. If you have a deeply held disagreement, make the case. Have faith that if you reason with people in good faith, we can work together. That's one of the things we've forgotten. Democracy depends upon an assumption of good faith among fellow citizens. And I think people can understand if you talk to them honestly and openly and not have partisan politics twisting people's minds and ruining their ability to see clearly and speak clearly and honestly and from the heart.
Thank you, Mr. Avalon. Congressman Loloda.
We live in a constitutional republic, not a direct democracy, that the members of the House of Representatives and the Senate get to vote with their voting card. They get to vote their conscience. Should be informed by their constituents, but sometimes there needs to be some boldness and some courage to sometimes do what's unpopular. I helped throw out George Santos because he lied to the voters of the 3rd District. Some folks in my own party didn't like that I did that. When somebody was up for speaker for my party who didn't support SALT, who didn't support 9/11 World Trade Center health care funding, who didn't support flood insurance, I blocked that person from becoming speaker. Sometimes the job requires doing things that are sometimes unpopular. That's what I've done. It should be done after being informed properly. I've held 14 town halls, 4 teletown halls, 10 in person, none of which at either one was payment or party affiliation required. Members of Congress should get feedback and then vote their conscience afterwards. That's what I've done, Joy.
Thank you. Now we're going to turn to closing statements. Each of you get 1 minute for that. And Mr. Loloda, you go first.
Joy, we live in the greatest nation the world has ever known. For the last 80 years, we've been blessed with so much prosperity. We have the largest military and the largest economy. We've done great things with it for the last 80 years. But voters of Long Island know this country is heading in the wrong direction. And we know that because what we see the southern border is a total mess. And we see that was done out of intentional choice by President Biden. We've seen the U.S. Senate, controlled by the other party, has blocked progress there. We have real solutions which ought to be implemented on the border. We have real solutions that ought to be implemented with our taxes and our economy too. We have to curb that wasteful federal spending. We have to explore more energy here in the United States. Likewise, we also have to be stronger on the world stage. We're going in the wrong direction right now. We have to put America back on the right track. I'm dedicated to our country every day of the week and twice on Sunday to ensure this remains the greatest nation the world has ever known. If you have any more questions about me, it's at nickloloda.com. I hope I've earned your
Thank you,
support.
Congressman. Mr. Avalon.
This election is the most consequential of our lifetimes. Democracy is in danger. And we live in a great country, the greatest country, but we need to make sure every citizen is stepping up and doing what they can, because the choice is between more chaos and division and dysfunction or finding more common ground and community and solving problems on a bipartisan basis together. From the beginning of this campaign, I've been committed to building a broad, bipartisan, patriotic coalition to defending American democracy. And I've been honored to earn the endorsement of Democrats and Republicans and independents. That's Suffolk County values. That's what Suffolk County needs. The politics of addition, not division, not just in campaigning, but in governing. That's a deep commitment, because at the end of the day, you're making a decision to hire someone to do a job. Who represents your values? Who can best amplify your voice? Who promises a return to the reasonable or empowering extremes that will lead to more chaos in our country? We need to unite, not divide. That's why I'm running for Congress, and that's why I'd be honored to earn your vote.
Thank you, Mr. Avalon. And it's now my turn. I get to say thank you, Congressman Loloda. Thank you, Mr. Avalon, for joining us for this debate.
Thank you.
And I get to remind you that our Newsday political team has been watching this debate for their coverage, and which will include fact-checking, and for any information you want on the upcoming campaigns and the upcoming elections, go to newsday.com. I'm Joy Brown. Thank you for watching.